Welcome to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is not Alan Saunders next to me. This is Derrick Bell. Get used to seeing me and Derrick on the same screen together, by the way, because maybe not on Steelers Afternoon Drive, but this is about the time of year where we're going to start doing some content together as we get into the draft season. Very excited that Derrick is on the show with me because it hasn't been the two of us on here since like the end of preseason for the Steelers. Obviously, a lot has happened. Then an entire football season. Derrick, what's going on?
Chilling, man. Yeah, it's been an interesting week. We got a lot going on. Shrine Bowl just ended, Senior Bowl down in Mobile.
Mhm.
Steelers hiring an offensive coordinator at like the worst possible time, just time purposes on my end. But yeah, it's been fun, man. It's been a really fun week. Just a lot going on. It's helping pass the time for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you to a different level even than me, but there's a lot of sickos that really get into this draft stuff. You are certainly one of them. And a lot of the questions that we're going to be answering today are going to be centered around the draft, the Steelers draft, the way that they could go. I know some of the people threw some free agency stuff in here as well, but basically that's what I want to turn today's episode into is a little bit of a Q&A, and actually on your own personal channel, what you planned on having be like a 20-ish minute video turned into an hour plus long video of you answering questions. So go over there, check that out. And I bet you, Derrick, that we could have some regurgitation in terms of the topics that are answered on here. But
Yeah, I'm sure.
nonetheless, we appreciate the questions. We appreciate the topics that you guys gave us, and we will just jump right into it. Tyler says, anyone you see the Steelers realistically trading up for if they do?
Man, that's a tough one. I mean, just to kind of hit on, kind of the strengths of the class, and I'm assuming like when people are talking trade up, I think they're mostly referring to like in the first round, right? So, I think the strengths of
Or,
this
yeah.
class really revolve around two positions. I think that the Steelers really need: tackle and cornerback. So, when you talk
Mhm.
about potential trade up options, this is a deep class. For both of those positions, I mean, I think we could see as many as like 7 offensive tackles go in the first round and probably a half dozen corners. Like, I mean, like that's how good this position group is. But
Yeah.
there are going to be guys that, depending on if you're looking for a specific skill set or a specific player that fits your measurables and all that stuff, I could definitely see them moving up. I mean, Omar Khan just did it last year in his first ever draft, right?
Yeah.
Like he moved up to get his guy, Broderick Jones. He didn't want to wait to see him potentially go off the board before he had the chance to select him. So I definitely think the aggressiveness is there in terms of like guys that I personally wouldn't hate trading up for. Probably the one guy I keep coming back to, and like people have heard me gush about him a lot recently, is Alabama's Terrion Arnold, cornerback guy who has
There
just
it
like
is. Yeah.
he had a fantastic year this past year. I mean, opposite Kool-Aid McKinstry, I mean, Arnold has everything that you want in the modern day cornerback, like the footwork, the change of direction skills, the ability to trigger, explosive, competitive at the catch point. He's got a dense frame. He plays the run well. I mean, he does so much stuff really well. Obviously very well coached, playing for the greatest defensive mind maybe of all time in Nick Saban. So he would be a guy for me that I think, is in that cornerback one discussion. He's the best cornerback I've watched. So if they deemed him a good fit, I'd love to get him opposite Joey Porter Jr.
Yeah, I was going through like filtering through some questions here, and that was actually going to be one of my answers to a separate question. But absolutely, I think that he would be somebody that falls into that bucket. It's just interesting to me because we're having a similar conversation this year with the draft class as we did last year. Like, not only just the team needs, but where they're picking in the draft as well, like what the sweet spot could be for the positions. I mean, you look at last year's class, they go trade up for offensive tackle and then corner. Would we be all that surprised if it's the same route this year with their first two picks? I mean, especially if they address center and free agency, then I think that
Yeah.
that really opens the door for those to be the first two picks. But we're going to have a lot of questions about center and free agency, so I'll leave it
Yeah.
at that right now. I don't know where else I could go. I think Terry and Arnold was going to be my answer to this for sure. Because if you're not going that route, man, like maybe let's throw a fun one out there. And let's say that they're just being really coy about their interest in the quarterback class. And you see like a Jaden Daniels start to slide or something like that. Like that is the one scenario that I'll throw out there that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, Daniels to me is, in terms of the quarterbacks, which I'm sure there may or may not be a quarterback question in the replies on Twitter. But in terms of the
There is.
quarterbacks, in terms of like who I think I would realistically be okay with spending a first round pick on,
Mhm.
it's Williams, May, and then Daniels. I think I'm less sold on Daniels. I think there's more work to be done just because I
Yeah.
think some of his process is really inconsistent. But in terms of when you're taking shots at a quarterback in the first round, you want that upside. I think Daniel's dual threat ability definitely offers that. Um, But yeah, I mean, this you made a good point about them potentially investing in the two positions again, right? Tackle, cornerback, and really, I think it may sound weird on the surface, but then you think about it, like those two positions haven't been something that the Steelers have invested in heavily. That's why we were so
Mhm.
excited that they did it last year because they haven't taken a first round tackle in so long. They haven't taken a first round corner other than Artie Burns. I think like once in my lifetime, going back to like Chad Scott in the late '90s, something like that. So I mean, seeing those two positions, those are premier positions in the modern NFL. So seeing them invest in those in back-to-back seasons definitely wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And you potentially get bookend players at two really important spots. I mean, that's a great foundation.
This comes from Tyler. That he wants your thoughts on the free agent receivers. And what I think is interesting about this question is maybe your answer has shifted based on the hiring of Arthur Smith, just because of the type of personnel that he's going to run, and maybe the utilization or lack thereof from a third pass catching option like a slot receiver, where you see a limited number of targets within Arthur Smith's offense in the past.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers. You and I have talked about this a lot. I feel like even dating back to last year when we were doing draft content together, there's there's not there's not been a steady stream of production from the slot receiver spot. You even go back to like the beginning of the
Mhm.
Matt Canada era, really since Juju started getting hurt. They've filtered in guys like Chase Claypool. They traded for Allen Robinson. I mean, there's just been no production. But in terms of like targets, you mentioned a good point with Arthur Smith's offense. I mean, there isn't very much production out of there either. I want to say they were dead last year in targets from that spot. I mean, he would use
Yeah, I
different
think 34 targets in
yeah.
total.
Yeah, I mean, he would use different bodies in there. I mean, they would a lot of times for the Falcons when they would go to like 3-by-1, you would have Cal Pitts as the number 3 receiver to the strong side. So, I mean, it can be
Mhm.
skewed a little bit in that way depending on how you classify Pitts. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that this is. I do think that my answers changed in terms of potential free agent receivers or how high of a priority that would be in the draft. I mean, I always
Sure.
kind of think the door is open for the Steelers to take a day two receiver every single year just because of how they've historically
Mhm.
operated. But I think with Smith's offense and how heavy it is with tight end personnel and 12, 13 personnel, heavy, I don't think it really makes a lot of sense to go out and spend a lot of money. Now they definitely need to add to the room. Allen Robinson, I don't anticipate being back. There are some guys in the draft that I really like. Just want to shout out Florida's Ricky Purcell. That's a guy that I'm way higher on than the consensus. I'll just say that. And I think he's had a really good senior ball. I've been seeing a lot of tweets, but this receiver class in particular is better than last year's. So the potential for one of those like top 10, top 15 receivers to potentially fall into the third round, the fourth round, where the Steelers may say, all right, we're comfortable with the value here. We really like this player. I think there's potential there, even with the lack of true 11 personnel in Smith's system.
Sure. Yeah. I think it kind of eliminates the thought process for me where it's like I was looking at
Hmm.
this free agent class and I was like, does a reunion make sense for, and I say reunion, but I mean really just coming home for Tyler Boyd or like a Curtis Samuel, something like that. Cause I
Yeah,
gotta give Nick Farabaugh a shout out here. I could see him wanting to use Calvin Austin in like a Khalif Raymond type of role like he had
that was my
in
comp
Tennessee and
for
him be,
Calvin coming out.
oh, wow.
It's
I didn't
funny.
even know that actually. That's funny.
Yeah.
But Nick Farabaugh threw that out there on the TL, and I saw that, and I was like, "Yeah, that would actually make a ton of sense." But I will say too, maybe another part to throw into this equation is Deontay being on a contract year. I mean, I
Hmm.
don't know what the process is going to be like with the organization with him, but also as much as I love Deontay and want him to be a part of this, and I think that he's a quarterback's best friend, I am curious about his fit in Arthur Smith's offense. I think it's more catered to a guy like George Pickens, which is why I could still see like a guy I want to throw out there is Malachi Corley, who I absolutely love, and I think he can fit into most offenses. I think everybody's chasing like that Debo Samuel type of receiver. You just get the
Hmm.
ball in his hands and he can operate like a running back. I mean, if there's one guy in this class that streams Debo Samuel, it's Malachi Corley.
He's working with the. I mean, I wrote about Corley for SteelersNow.com. Y'all can go find the article. Did a draft profile on him this week or in the last week actually. But you mentioned an interesting name with Corley.
Mhm.
You look back at Arthur Smith's offenses and think about like the first year he was there about what he did with Cordell Patterson, right? And like I
Yeah.
think that Corley has some similarities in terms of Patterson starting out a receiver, kind of shifting to running back. He can do some different things. You can flex him out. You can use him in the slot. Another guy I think that is interesting that you kind of mentioned too. This to me would be higher of an investment that I could see them really making. But I think a guy like Curtis Samuel kind of can do some of the same things too. Like some of the things that Washington did
Yeah.
with him, some of the things that he did at Ohio State in terms of lining up in the backfield. You can throw him the ball. Smith's teams have had some encouraging moments in the screen game. So like that's a way that you can use Curtis. But to your
Yeah.
point about Deontay, it is weird because I was just thinking, I've watched in the past like 40 or I guess probably 36 hours, I've watched about 5 Falcons games. And the whole time I kept coming back to is like, man, like I don't remember Arthur Smith's offense ever having a guy like Deontay. Like all the
Yeah.
receivers that you think of in his offenses have always been those bigger guys because they use those tight splits and just the way that they're utilized, the route concepts that they like. AJ Brown, Corey Davis, Drake London, Matt Collins,
Mhm.
all those guys are huge. I mean, Deontay's a featherweight compared to them. So how that fit comes into play is very different. He's a guy that I'm going to need to watch a good bit more to figure out how he could potentially be used in this offense. But I do agree, like him being on a contract year and a kind of a weird fit in this offense, it could definitely
Mhm.
spring, a higher pick than maybe we're anticipating.
Sure. And maybe going along with this, because we're talking about playmakers, John says, "Are you concerned with Pat Fryermuth and what his usage could look like in the offense?"
I'm not as concerned as maybe others are. I do think that there are some concerning things with Pitts. All I'll say is like 2022, Kyle Pitts' numbers. I know that was really like he had that crazy rookie year in 2021, and then the rookie or the sophomore year numbers were down. 2022 was, I don't want to say mostly, or yeah, I will say mostly just because of bad quarterback play. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
man, like
Yeah.
they just could not get the dude the ball. Like, and it wasn't that they weren't designing plays to go his way, or he wasn't necessarily just getting like any targets. It was just the amount of inaccurate passes that were headed his way. Like that's not on the coordinator, man. Like you have to be able to have a quarterback that can deliver an accurate throw. This past year, I don't think they did a good enough job getting him involved in the offense through different stretches. I mean, there are things that they do. I'm actually going to do a YouTube video on this tonight about a play that they run for him that I think Pat will fit right in on. Um, but I will say this about Pitts. Pitts was not fully healthy last year. So I think you do have to keep that into your mind when you're evaluating like that
Sure.
situation. He, had that season-ending injury in 2022. It came out, I think, a couple weeks ago that he posted an Instagram post or whatever saying that like he had more damage, I think, to his knee or whatever he ended up injuring than was previously
Mm.
let on. And you can tell they would use him on a lot of like clear outs and stuff. And you could tell he just didn't have the same amount of juice. I mean, he's still a plus athlete for the position, but he didn't look like the unicorn that I saw coming out of Florida a couple years ago. And that's a part. So some of it's team, some of it's quarterback play, some of it's I think Pitts just wasn't quite 100% this year.
Sure. Yeah. Um, Jared says, with Arthur Smith coming in, how do you think this affects the draft? Feel like we need to get younger on defense and spend higher capital there, but also think they could use higher picks on the offensive line and keep revamping that. Well, yeah, first and foremost, obviously, with them going this shift in scheme, center, circle it. They're gonna have a new center. We knew that anyways was going to be the case. But with what Arthur Smith's offense asks of the position, it's like no question to me that that's going to be something either the first free agent that they sign or the most money they spend in free agency could be on a center, or it's going to be within their first two picks.
Yeah, center is to me it's the number one need right now. Like
Yeah.
if you're saying that let's just put the quarterback stuff aside and say like all right, they're gonna skate by, they're gonna run this back, give Kenny Pickett a chance to work with a new offensive coordinator, allow him to compete with whatever vet you bring in, whether it's Mason Rudolph, is it Gallup, Ryan Tannehill, like somebody like that. Um, Center, it has to happen. Like you look at what go look at some of Arthur Smith's comments about Ben Jones, his center in Tennessee, and some of the things that they used him for, and how he really set the tone up front in the trenches for that offense. And then, he comes to Atlanta. The very first draft, they take Drew Dalman in the fourth round. Now, Dalman is a guy who wouldn't start for every single offense, but he's a perfect fit for
Right.
Smith's offense and that wide zone scheme because that dude is a unbelievable athlete. Like if there is one thing that does at an elite level, he gets out in space, he can move, he can get to the second level, he can seal off blocks. Just a phenomenal athlete. So there's a very specific skill type that he wants in his offensive lineman, particularly at the pivot. And I think, there has to be a significant investment at that position. They're like, it's a non-negotiable thing for me. So that's how it would affect the draft on offense. In terms of the defense, there's absolutely some concerns over there in terms of the investment needed. The Steelers were 32nd in defensive snaps per adjusted age this past year. I mean, they're old on that side of the ball. Like we know that
Hmm.
they've got some free agents. Patrick Peterson, we'll see what happens with him. So they need to add some talent. But they've got some decent amount of needs. So how they balance all that
Yeah.
out with free agency and the draft's gonna be interesting.
I will say, like, the one position for me, and I don't know where you stand on this, where I'm not addressing in the draft and I'm looking at free agency is the safety class. Like, I think the free agent safety class is so good this year. There's so many guys that are starting capable next to Minka Fitzpatrick. I'm not
Mhm.
even thinking about the draft for that position.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's a really good point actually too. I mean, just some guys that are available. I'm looking at the list right now, like uh, Chauncey Gardner Johnson, a versatile safety. You talk about being able to flip kind of the responsibilities on the back end with him and Minka. I know he was hurt this year, but he's a guy who signed for pretty much pennies on the dollar compared to like what his play level was in Philly the year before.
Mhm.
Other like youngish guys too, Chuck Clark, Jordan Whitehead for the Jets. J-Ron
Kyle
Curse is
Duggar.
kind of a Oh, yeah. Now that's gonna cost you a little bit, but man, could you
Mhm.
imagine having Kyle Duggar and Minka Fitzpatrick in the same backfield? That's like, oh my god, oh my god.
Maybe could be a little bit worried because I don't think he was like, especially after the rookie year he had, I thought he was going to do great things in Carolina, but Jeremy Chin's a free agent, maybe
Yeah,
like a buy low swing candidate.
yeah.
Yeah, I like the safety class. Geno Stone probably not getting out of Baltimore. He's also a free agent, and that'd be an interesting fit to see how those two would play in the back end, two ball
Mm-hmm.
hawks, and then Minka. But yeah, I think the free agent safety class is so good. I
That's a
wouldn't
good
be
point.
looking at the draft for that with the other needs they have. Um, Tyler, here we go. This is kind of along with the same question because other Tyler, my co-host of Around the 4 and 2, Jackson
Legend.
Powers Johnson at pick 20. Convince me why they shouldn't. I'll hang up and listen.
I'm gonna have a hard time convincing you that they shouldn't because I think they should. I mean, I
I know,
wrote with
yeah. I like unless
er,
Terry and Arnold is also there,
yeah.
there's not like a player that I think I'd be pounding the table to take it over him.
Yeah, it's really tough because I want to give credit to Nick Martin, one of my
Mhm.
probably closest friends in terms of the draft stuff, and we'd constantly talking ball. And he was really early on Powers Johnson, and
I feel like
I
he's
was sitting
early on
there watching.
everybody.
Yeah, he watches a lot of ball. But I so about a week ago, I was trying to do my Senior Bowl prep. I was like, all right, I want to get through some more tape on some of these guys that like I haven't watched as much of. Dude, I flip on the tape and I'm like, there's no flaws with this dude's game. Like he does everything well. Like he's 334 pounds. He moves incredibly well in space. He's physical. He's a finisher. He has a wrestling background. He's a brawler. Like he plays with a chip on his shoulder. Like he gave up, I want to say he gave up like one or single digit pressures this year as a pass protector. Now, granted, some of that is
Jeez.
because Oregon's like RPO heavy scheme, and he wasn't tested as
Sure.
much in pass protection at like he will be at the next level. But there's just very little not to like. And I have to just look at it from the Steelers' perspective, knowing how important that position is in Arthur Smith's offense. It's difficult to argue against it. Now, I will say we just don't see a lot of centers go in the first round. The NFL doesn't really prioritize that position. I mean, you have to be a really special prospect like Tyler Linderbaum, even like guys like Creed Humphrey
Mhm.
didn't go in the first round. I mean, we all remember that. But
Yeah.
it's just you don't see a lot of them. So I guess if you're trying to make an argument not to, like, it's not considered a premier position, and you should argue, okay, we need to go find a left
Yeah.
tackle or right tackle, depending on what you do at Jones. But man, it's hard for me to see a 21-year-old that's already that good, who's only played 1 year of center at the collegiate level. It's just very hard for me to argue against that, all things considered.
Yeah, and I love Frazier and Van Pran, but maybe to the benefit of Powers Johnson, both of them dealing with injuries coming back from those throughout this
Hmm.
process. So that
Yeah,
could
it's
push
great.
him up because of what he.
Frazier's
Yeah,
rehab is going incredible. I mean, the dude
sure.
broke his
Yeah.
leg right like 2 months ago, and he's
Hmm.
already like jogging. I don't even
Yeah,
understand the physics behind that, but
sure.
yeah, it's a good point with the injury thing. I mean, Van Pran, he dropped out of the Senior Bowl, so like
Hmm.
he's not going to have that opportunity. You just look at some of the. I mean, go look at Twitter. All these clips of JPJ absolutely dominating down in Mobile. I mean, that was a chance for Van Brand to kind of reboost his stock, and he's not going to
Hmm.
get that, unfortunately. So
Sure. The guy that, in my opinion, went into the 2023 season as the likely center one, now very well could be center three at best
yep.
because of this injury. People are talking about him in anywhere from rounds 3 to 5. They're looking at right now. I saw Dane Brugler put that
Hmm.
out. Joey Sims says, I'm interested in this. Give me, and I like this a lot, actually. One reason the Steelers offense will be top 15 next season under Smith, and one reason it would be bottom 15. So flip of the coin here, it could go either direction, right? Under Arthur Smith, what is the biggest reason it would swing the pendulum in either direction?
Oh man, that's a good question. Um, I mean, Smith's offense to me is heavily predicated, obviously, on the run game. So, I mean, if you're looking at a reason for them to be top 15, it's having a dominant run game, forcing defenses into very specific looks, very basic looks with your formations, with your personnel groupings, and then being able to play action pass and sequence plays to generate like
Yeah.
explosives down the field through the passing game. I think if
Yep.
you're looking for a top 15 offense, like the formula is there on like because his offense really hasn't changed much, at least from what I've seen so far from Tennessee to Atlanta. The big differences is like when the run game like isn't humming, there's problems because he doesn't have like a vast, crazy, modern drop by passing game. That's just not his strength as an offensive coordinator. So I'll say like just the run game and the ability to sequence off of that. Now I think how things could kind of go off the rails in terms of them being a bad offense again. To me, it's pretty simple there. If they don't run the ball well, that's going to force more on the drive back passing game and in turn force more on the quarterback. And, we saw what Smith's offense, I think, over the past 2 seasons looks like when you don't get good quarterback play. I mean, 2022, they were an above average offense, even with Mariota. But this past season, with Ritter and Heineke, just them turning the ball over all the time, even though Ritter did have some flashes of good play, just wasn't consistent enough. And I think the more that Smith's offense takes so much off the quarterback's plate, but if you don't run the ball, you in turn have to put more back on the quarterback's plate. And I just don't think that's where you want to be. So I'll say that could be the downfall.
Yeah, you kind of hit on what I was going to say is it's going to be about can Kenny hit on the deep shots, and I say Kenny, but hey, Mason, Ryan Tannehill, Michael
Yeah.
Pratt, whoever it ends up being the quarterback, if they're going to hit on these deep shots down the field that the run game opens up for, I think is going to be and you said that with the explosive plays, like if
Hmm.
this offense is going to be in top 15, it's because they're going to hit on those. Why it wouldn't is if they maybe misjudged the way that Arthur Smith's offense would fit the personnel that they have. Like,
That's a
you
good
can
point too.
bring
I have
in
similar concerns there. Yeah.
one coach to think that they can fit with the personnel, and you can replace that coach obviously, but you can't replace a bunch of personnel at one time just in one fell
Hmm.
swoop. So they really need to hope that Arthur Smith's offense is going to work with the group that they have, because sure, they got free agency and a draft to plug some holes and stuff like that. They're not going to completely change the personnel that they have with the offensive group in this offseason to fit Arthur Smith's offense. It needs to be him that fits the offense.
Yeah. And then we go back to like just offensive coordinator talk in general, right? Like the best offensive coordinators are constantly 2 steps ahead of trends, which I think that's one of my concerns with Smith in general. I think that the best play
Mhm.
callers are always kind of 2 steps ahead of defensive coordinators, and I think Smith is one of those guys who, he stays on the forefront of some stuff, but like he kind of just goes with where the wind's taking him a little bit, and like he has a very specific offense that he likes to run, for better or worse. And I think, like you said, the ability to kind of shift his offense to fit what the Steelers do really well. I mean, after the bye week last year, we saw the Steelers lean into a lot more gap heavy runs. Like a lot of the
Yeah.
best games or best runs that they had, it felt like down the stretch were gap heavy runs, getting Najee Harris downhill, pulling the guards, pulling the tackles, dart, trap plays, all the different stuff. It's not really part of Smith's offense. I mean, the last 3 years he's
Right.
been dead last in power runs. So it's going
Mhm.
to be a big schematic shift from what they're used to. How he blends that and how they add personnel to fit what they need to do is going to be. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating case study, in my opinion.
Right. I think everybody was looking at on the surface the philosophy of, okay, this guy runs the ball, the Steelers run the football, they
It's a
go
very
together,
good
but
point.
get it done in a different
It's
way.
it's very
So
different. It's very different. I think
yeah,
people that are looking at it like that, like I've seen a lot of people say like, "Oh, you guys wanted to get back to smash mouth football and play action and all this different stuff." It's like, yes, that's generally fine, but there are different ways to get that approach done. And I think that the way that Smith does it is just different than what we've seen with the Steelers offense. For better or worse, we're gonna find out.
sure. Aiden says, what mid-round quarterback or wide receiver do you have your eyes on?
I already mentioned Purcell. That's the
Yeah.
guy that I like a lot. You mentioned Corley. He's another guy that I think is really interesting. Quarterback, to me, I think It's Tulane's Michael Pratt, I think is a guy
Sure.
that I would be
Would you
potentially
maybe
interested
put
in.
Spencer Rattler in that bucket too? Like, I don't know where he's
Mhm.
gonna go, but I think, like, with the tools that he has, like, there's some intrigue there. Like,
Yeah.
I see people throwing around the Joe Milton thing just because I think that they're
Nope,
chasing
nope,
the
nope.
but I understand. I get where the intrigue is coming from. I just don't. I'm not in that group. Because
Yeah,
it's a big guy with a huge arm. You're chasing the Anthony Richardson thing. You're not going to find it in Joe Milton. But
yeah. Totally
I
agree.
understand where
Yeah.
he's coming from.
I think it's Pratt and Rattler are the two guys to me that kind of stand out. I mean, in terms of guys that I think will actually go in that third to fourth round range.
Hmm.
Rattler's really interesting because he starts his career. He's incredible talent, just burst onto the scene. He gets his job taken from Caleb Williams, and then goes to South Carolina. I don't think he started off, the way that people were anticipating. But then, like I thought, just watching 2 games of film from this past year from him, and then seeing him live, he's better than I thought he was going to
Yeah.
be. And
Hmm.
because of some of the disadvantages that South Carolina had on offense, they were terrible up front. You actually got to see some stuff from him, like in terms of like creation capacity that we just didn't know that he had. And I also think the measurements for him, he measured in 6 foot even, which we knew he was a short king, but he was like 220 pounds. That's pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the build. That's a very unique build. It's almost like a Baker Mayfield-ish build of a quarterback. And I think that those two guys, Pratt, I love the accuracy. I think he's really competitive. There are some really high level flashes over the middle of the field in terms of anticipation. So those two guys would be my pick.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with those 2 wide receivers. I shared the Malachi Corley thing. I actually just started watching Ricky because of your tweet about it. I got some games of him. Yeah, I don't know if I could give you another one right now, to be quite honest with you. I'm very early in my process here of going through any film study, so um, I'll give you more in depth on this later on. But like I said, Derek and I are going to be
We got plenty of
doing some
time,
stuff together
brother.
throughout. Yeah. Um, SBA says, always great to have Derrick on. Do you see the need to acquire a true fullback for Smith's running scheme? If so, draft or free agency?
Yes, they're gonna have to bring in somebody. I don't know what that looks like. I'll be honest with you. I
Yeah,
have
they had a pretty good one in Atlanta.
Yeah, I have zero intel on what the draft fullback market is going to look like. But yeah, I mean, I want to say just looking at Smith's personnel usage,
Mhm.
there's like I said, there's a ton of tight end stuff, obviously, that we've already hit on 12, 13 personnel. And some of that could be blurred maybe with a guy like Connor Hayward. But the Falcons used a true fullback. I don't think that Connor Hayward is a true fullback. He's a little bit more of like that hybrid.
Oh, you know what?
Um,
Keith Smith is a free agent.
so just bring him over, pay him $1 million, and let's just roll.
Yeah. I didn't I was curious about that. Yeah, he was on a 1 year, $2.35 million last year.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with
So,
that. Go try to pay him 1.5 million on the cap or something and get it done. That just simplifies things. Knows the
mhm.
offense, just right.
Um, this I always appreciate this. The same person has asked us questions basically every time I've looked for them. So shout out to Lord Megatron's op here. Should we be concerned about Kenny not being the long-term solution with the addition of a rookie quarterback and possibly Ryan Tannehill? Listen, if there was no buzz about them adding another quarterback, I would still be very, very, very worried about the projection of Kenny Pickett long term based off what we've seen on the field so far. So I think this question could have been simplified into should we be concerned about Kenny?
Yeah, I mean, how could you not be? I don't.
Yeah.
I know. I think sometimes, and this isn't anything like I'm pretty sure that dude follows me on Twitter. He's a cool dude, so I don't want to like make
Mhm.
make it
Yeah.
sound like I'm
Yeah.
like being a dick or anything like that. Like, I think sometimes like people want us to give like unwarranted optimism, and that's just like me and you, like just the way that we talk about ball and like give our opinions and stuff. Like we try to be like non-biased about things, right? And like I think that if you just look at the body of work, what we've seen over the past 2 years, I mean, yeah, it's really concerning. Just the way that he's played, the way the offense has played, his development. I mean, it would be ignorant to not be concerned at this point. Now, one thing that I'll say about Smith, and I tweeted this out right before we jumped on, just in the 6 games I've watched so far, I think that Smith's offense is really less about like developing him. I think some people are confusing Smith's like quarterback friendly offense with him being a quarterback developer. And I think that those are two
Said the
different
same
things.
thing. Yeah.
But I do think that there's a lot of stuff in Smith's offense that makes it easy on the quarterback and can maximize. They're going to do the stuff that he does well a lot, and he's going to try to minimize the stuff that he doesn't do well as much as he possibly can, as long as the run game is working. All right. So that's really the
Yeah.
formula. And you talk about some of the deep shots and stuff, like Kenny can throw the ball down the field. Like we've seen him throw like go balls and stuff like that. Some of the stuff that he doesn't do well, like I do think that Smith has some guardrails in the offense to be able to minimize that and make it easier on him. I mean, there's tons of stuff in his offense, like the play action shots. There's, deep max protection play action 1-2 to check down. And then there's half field reads where it's 1-2 to check down. Like it's not a bunch of like full progression stuff to where his flaws, I guess, like as a processor or as an anticipatory thrower are going to show up. Like there is
Mhm.
some times where that's necessary in his offense, and we're going to find out if Kenny can do it. But there's also a lot of like easy buttons in the offense to make it easier on him. And I think that that's at least encouraging if you look at it from that perspective.
Right, and it almost makes me wonder, like, where we would be at with Kenny if Arthur Smith was the first offensive coordinator that he had when he first came into the NFL, because that's one thing too. While I am obviously, like, pretty close to being fully out on Kenny Pickett, full disclosure here, I understand that the organization was going to give I fully expect the organization to give him this year, but that's just where I'm at with it personally. I do also think that it is a knock on the organization to give him the environment that he came into, with Matt
Oh,
Canada as his
100%.
offensive coordinator, Mike Sullivan as a quarterback coach. I
Asinine.
obviously not an ecosystem that was going to put any quarterback in the best position to succeed. So while I didn't love the idea of drafting Kenny, I'm very concerned about where we're at with him right now. I do question where we could have possibly have been if we had somebody like Arthur Smith here as the offensive coordinator, with how friendly his system is for the quarterback right away.
You're exactly right. And I think that, the Pitt fans are like really mad at me on Twitter, like nonstop. So, I mean, I didn't,
This is
I
a
didn't
this is
like
a change up, by the way. I think this is going to be a change up for the people in the comments, because normally they get the impression that Alan and I are just totally bashing Mason Rudolph, and
the
this is
Pitt
going to
fans
be like
hate
a
me.
flipping of the script. Yeah.
And the thing is, the context that you gave is very necessary context. Like you can admit, like both things can be true at one time, right? Like we can admit
Mhm.
that the Steelers promoting Matt Canada offensive coordinator was an atrocious decision. And I mean, one that like, and I'm not trying to sit here and like gloss over my wins and stuff like that, but like that was such an easy spade to call in real time. And they still did it. And then they kept him for multiple years. Like running it back in 2023 with him was asinine. And like we
Yeah.
said that, and it played out exactly how we said it was going to play out. And giving him that environment, even if you do like some of the pieces on offense, it's not good enough for a young quarterback. And like not saying it's the worst situation ever or anything like that, but they didn't set him up easily for success. Now, on the flip side of that, there are simple things that Kenny still is struggling with going into year 3 that you would just not expect from a guy who's 26 years old and has played that much ball. It just is what it is. And that's where some of the concern about him being a capable starter that you can win meaningful games with comes into play. Your point about like where we would be if Arthur Smith was the play caller for the first 2 years of his career,
Mhm.
I think that there is a very realistic chance that where we would be is Kenny would have this label as a game manager, the same label that a lot of like, if you think back to like the Tannehill thing, he was probably at the upper end of the game manager talk, where Kenny would
Mhm.
probably have or I won't say probably, definitely had better statistical numbers to where people would be saying like, okay, well, like he can do this, and this. He can do like the deep play action shots. He can go 1-2. He can create a little bit, run around, scramble. But like, what else can he do? And people will be labeling him as like this like mid-tiered or like 20th or 18th best starter in the league instead of having the
Alex
conversation we're
Smith.
having. Yeah, instead of having the conversation that we're having right now, which is like, can this dude
Mhm.
be a starting quarterback at all? Like at all. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Derek, we're already running a little bit over, but I got this last one. Zach says, "Why is Cane's the best fast food chicken restaurant?"
man, Canes is trash, man. I hope that Steeler like man, I haven't
we
I've
had we
given
had to
this
get it
take
on.
so many
By the
on
way, Zach isn't me.
Twitter.
This is ZAK Zach.
Okay. Yeah, man, like Steelers afternoon drive, faithful. Please don't let me down in the comments or anything like that. Like do something better with your life and take yourself, go get you some better food than Cane's. Don't subject yourself to that mediocre chicken. Please do better, be better. I have way more faith in you guys than that.
I'm so appreciative of Zach, first off, for his first name. Secondly, for putting this in here so I could bring it up on the show. And now we can get some thoughts on the comments that aren't necessarily football related either. So hit us in the comments with your thoughts on Canes. But more importantly, as well, we also do want to know how you feel about everything that we talked about. Wide ranging conversation today on Steelers Afternoon Drive there. Covered a lot of stuff. We're going to continue to cover a lot of stuff. Tell the people where they could find you for this coverage.
Yeah, at Steelers_DB, just on Twitter, YouTube. That's cool.
Okay, and SteelersNow.com.
Yeah, and on SteelersNow.com. Yeah, a lot of draft content, especially over the last week. Like I mentioned earlier, Malachi Corley, draft profile, Senior Bowl thoughts, all that stuff. I'm probably going to write something tomorrow-ish on some Arthur Smith stuff, mainly from like a statistical and schematic standpoint. So if you guys are interested in that, be sure to go to the site.
I am maybe the worst friend in the world because I'm going to go read that Malachi Corley thing right now because I totally missed that being a thing. So that's my guy, and I got to check that out. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Hit us in the comments, like I said, your thoughts on anything that we talked about. Also, questions for when it's back with Alan and I. I assume tomorrow. You know, Alan sometimes, as you guys have seen on this show, you never know what's going to be going on with Alan Saunders, especially when he's in Mobile, Alabama.
Busiest man in
And
the
we might
world.
catch him at Veets. Yeah. Busiest man in the world, as we like to say. Leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever that might be. Once again, thanks for jumping in with us. For Derrick Bell, for Zachary Smith, this has been Steelers Afternoon Drive. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.